He asked for you, Father.
He asked for me?
Yes, Father, he's scared. And he said that he needed you.
Has the man confessed to his crime?
No, but maybe he will. He's calm now, but we do not know for how long he will remain so. Far from the bars of the cell, Father. Sometimes they spit and curse and do more abominable things.
Speak, my son. Tell of it. Take the weight off yourself. Ask God for his mercy. It has no bounds. There is still hope for your soul. Speak.
For the most wild, yet most homely story that I am about to narrate, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where the very senses reject their own evidence. Yet man am I not, and surely do I not dream. Tomorrow dies. And today, I will unburden my soul. My primary motive is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have tortured me, terrified me, and have destroyed me, yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they present little but horror. I detail to you with awe nothing more than a very ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my childhood, I was always known for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to be a matter of jest amongst my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and my parents indulged me with a great variety of these. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as I was when either feeding them or caressing them. Peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and from it I derived in my manhood one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those of you who have cherished an affection for a faithful or a sagacious dog, I need hardly be at trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something about the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute that goes directly to the heart. Of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity. Dear man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a character that was not very unknown to my own. Observing my partiality for pets, she wasted no time in procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, a goldfish, a fine dog, a rabbit, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter thing was a large and beautiful animal, entirely black, and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of its intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tincture of superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches plainly. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with great difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship grew in this manner for several years, during which time my general character and temperament, through the instrumentality of feigned intemperance, experienced a rather radical alteration for the worse. Day by day, I grew more moody, more irritable, and more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. And at length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but also ill-used them. But for Pluto, however, I still managed to retain sufficient regard to prevent me from maltreating. As I made no scruple of maltreating the monkey, or the dog, or even the rabbits, when through affection or by accident they happened to come in my way. My disease grew. For what disease is there like alcohol? And at length, even Pluto, who was now old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, as I returned home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, and when, in sudden fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed to have taken its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my wasteful pocket a penknife. I opened and then grasped the beast by its throat, and then deliberately dug out one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder as I recall the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, and when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror and half of remorse for the crime of which I had just been guilty. But it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged myself into ecstasy, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of its lost eye presented, it is true, a rather frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer from any pain. He went about the household as usual, but as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. There was so much of my old heart left in me, to make me at first feel grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature that had once so loved me. This feeling soon gave way to the feeling of irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the sense of perverse. This sense of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence for its own nature, to do wrong for wrong's sake only, that goaded me to continue and finally consummate the injury that I inflicted upon the unrepentant brute. One morning, cool blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it from the limb of the tree. Hung it with the tears streaming down my eyes, and with the bitterest of remorse in my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, because I knew that it had offered me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin so deadly that it would jeopardize my soul to such an extent so as to place it, if such a thing were even possible, even beyond the infinite mercy of the most merciful and the most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this terrible deed was done, I was aroused from my sleep with cries of fire. The curtains of my bed were in blazes. The whole house was ablazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, myself, and the servant made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth had been swallowed up. And I resigned myself henceforward to despair. One night, as I sat, much stupefied, in a den of more than infamy, my attention was drawn to some black object resting upon the head of one of the barrels of gin or rum, which constituted the chief furniture of that apartment. I stared intently at this object on top of the barrel for several minutes. And what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, large, nearly fully as large as Pluto, and resembling him in every aspect except one. Now Pluto had not a single white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although very, very indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the entire region of the breast. Upon my touching it, the cat arose immediately, purred loudly, rubbed itself against my hand, and appeared delighted by my presence. This was then the animal of which I was in search of. I offered at once to purchase it of the landlord. He made no claim to it, knew nothing about it, had never seen it before. I continued my quest, and as I prepared to go home, the animal evinced the disposition to accompany me. I permitted it, occasionally even stooping and caressing it as I proceeded. Upon reaching my home, the animal domesticated itself at once and immediately became a favorite of my wife. For myself, however, I soon found a strong sense of dislike arising towards it within me. This was quite contradictory of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. But its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed me. Slowly, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame, and my remembrance of my former cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. For some weeks I did not strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I started to look upon it with a sense of unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence breath of pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the creature was the discovery, on the morning after I had brought it home, that like Pluto, it had also been deprived of an eye. This circumstance, however, only endeared it more to my wife, who, as I have already told you, possessed to a high degree that humanity of being, which was once my distinguishing trait, and the source of so many of my purest and simplest pleasures. My aversion to this cat, however, its partiality to myself only seemed to increase. It followed my every footstep with a pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the listener comprehend. Whenever I sat down, it would crouch beneath my seat or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. And if I arose to walk, it would get beneath my feet and thus nearly throw me over. Or it would fasten its sharp claws on my dress and clamber in this manner to my heart. And although at moments such as these I longed to strike it with a single blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by the remembrance of my former deed, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, chiefly, the absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss of how otherwise to describe it. I'm almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this tenant cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and the horror with which the beast inspired me was heightened by one of the merest chimeras ever possible to be conceived. My wife had called my attention on more than one occasion to the character of the mark of white hair, of which I have already spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one that I had destroyed. Now the listener will remember that this mark, although large, was originally very, very indefinite, but by slow degrees almost imperceptible, that my own reason at first rejected it as fanciful, it began to assume the rough distinctness of an outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this reason above all, I loathed and dreaded and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now the image of a ghastly, of a horrible thing, of the gallows. Oh, terrible, horrible vengeance of murder and of agony, of crime and of devastation. And now, indeed, was I more wretched than the mere wretchedness of humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had so contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast made to work out for me, a man, fashioned in the image of the high God himself. So much of an insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest anymore. During the former, the animal would leave me without a moment alone, and during the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear, only to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and to feel its entire weight, an incarnate corpse that I had no power to push off, resting entirely upon my heart. Upon the torments of pressures such as these, feeble remedy could within succumb. Dark thoughts gave my soul into the darkest and most evil of thoughts. My usual temper having increased to a hatred of all things and of all mankind, and with my frequent, sudden, and ungoverned outbursts of fury, to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife alas, was the most frequent and the most usual of sufferers. One day, she accompanied me on some household errand into the cellar of the building which our poverty had now compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep staircase, nearly throwing me over and thus exasperating me into madness, outlisting an axe and forgetting in my fury the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand. I aimed a blow at the animal, which would have definitely proven fatal had it descended as I wished. But the blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by this interference into a more than demonical rage, I withdrew my hand from her grasp and buried the axe into her skull. She fell dead on the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I now set myself with entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the premises either by day or by night without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Several projects entered my mind. At first, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them with fire. And then I resolved to bury it in a pit in the cellar itself. Then again, I thought of casting it in the well in the yard, or of packaging it as if like merchandise, with all the usual arrangements, and thus getting a porter to transport it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered to be a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, just as the monks of the medieval ages have been recorded to have walled up their victims. And for a purpose such as this, the cellar was very well suited. With the walls, the bricks were loosely constructed, and they were covered throughout with a rough plaster that was prevented from hardening by the dampness of the atmosphere. Moreover, there was a projection in the wall, much like this, caused by a fake chimney or a fireplace, and made it walled up to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could easily dislodge the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the hole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation, I was not deceived. With the means of crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks at this point, and having carefully deposited the corpse against the inner wall, I did, with little trouble, relay the entire structure as it had stood before. And having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I went on to prepare a plaster, which could not be distinguished from the old one. And with this, I relayed the entire new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not seem to bear the slightest resemblance of having been disturbed. The rubbish of the floor was picked up to the minutest of hair. I looked around triumphantly, and I said to myself, here at least then, my labor has not been in vain. My next task, however, was to find the beast that had been the cause of so much wretchedness in the first place. For I had at length firmly resolved in my mind to put it to death. Had I met the animal right then, there could have been no doubt of its fate. Here, crafty animal had been alarmed by the violence of my sudden temper, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, the blissful sense of relief that the absence of the detested creature bosomed in my heart. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus, for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I deeply and tranquilly slept. Even with the burden of murder upon my soul, I soundly slept. The second and the third day went by, and my tormentor came not. I breathed once again as a free man. The animal in its fright has fled the premises forever. I shall behold it no longer. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed troubled me little. A few inquiries had been made, but they had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but nothing was to be discovered. I looked at my future felicity as secure. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of police came, quite unexpectedly, into the house to make a rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The police bade me to accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. And then, for the third or fourth time that week, they descended into the cellar. But I quivered, not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked up and down the cellar. I crossed my arms upon my bosom and roamed freely to and fro. The police seemed completely satisfied and were preparing to depart. The key of my heart was too strong to be contained. I burned but to say just one word by means of triumph to render doubly sure of their assurance of my guiltlessness. Gentlemen! I finally said to the party ascending the stairs, I delight to have allayed your suspicion. I offer you all good health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. In my rapid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I had said at all. A very well-constructed house, I might add. These walls, I am going, gentlemen, these walls are very well put together. And here, with the mere frenzy of my bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane which I held in my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of my wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberance of my blows sunk into silence than it was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry, muffled and broken at first like the sobbing of a child, and then swelling into one long, loud and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, half of triumph and half of agony, such as one that might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in their damnation. My own thoughts, it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. The party on the stairs for an instant remained motionless, through extremity of horror and of awe. And in the next, a dozen stout arms toiled upon the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of all the spectators. And the boneless head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, rested the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I walked the monster up within the tomb.